Welcome back to Inside City Hall. For more than a century, newspaper columnists were known as the voice of the people, offering thoughts and insights about the news of the day. And while those columnists remain, there's still some that are prominent in New York City. They're sort of dying off around the country, in part because newspapers are closing up shop all over the country. And now a new collection of some great columns over the past 2 centuries highlights some of these great storytellers and their craft. Joining me now to talk about the new book, Deadline Artist, Scandals, Tragedies, and Triumphs, is one of the editors, Jesse Angelo, who is also the executive editor of the New York Post. We've also got here Michael Daly, one of the contributors. He's from Newsweek and the Daily Beast, and his column about firefighters lost on September 11th in those terrorist attacks at the World Trade Center site is part of this book. I should note I am also one of the editors of this book, and that it is possibly the finest volume ever published. It goes on sale tomorrow. Had to do that. Jesse, tell the folks why we subtitled it Scandals, Tragedies, and Triumphs.
Well, Errol, as you know, we did the first volume of the book, and it sold very, very well, surprisingly well, I think, for us and our publisher. I was just looking the other day. We outsold Pippa Middleton's new book, and we outsold Arnold Schwarzenegger's book.
Oh, that's a start. We should have asked for their advances. We'll talk to the agent about
exactly. But when we looked at the columns we had left, and we thought about them thematically, we saw that they fell down into these very neat categories, and that one of the ways people think about writing is scandals, tragedies, triumphs. These are very much the sort of the things that get columnists going. That's what gets them out of their chair and gets them down to the courthouse or down to the site of a murder or tragedy, whatever's going on. So when we looked at the columns we wanted to put into it, we saw these sort of broad thematic areas, and we thought it was a good way to organize the book.
And you know, there's never a shortage of scandals. In fact, we've got one going on now, David Petraeus, which I guess all of us as current or former tabloid people have got to be licking our chops over. It's got the sex and the secrecy and everything else. But columnists have been writing about this stuff for a long, long time. And Mike, I mean, when you decided to become a columnist, who were you reading, and who do you like? Who do you steal from?
Well, I mean, I think, you know, if you're an Irish guy in New York, it's Jimmy Breslin.
Sure.
I mean, that's and the first lesson you have to learn is that all the things that originally kind of attract you to him, the kind of performance, stage Irish kind of stuff, is not why he's good. And eventually you figure out that the reason he's good is he's an extremely smart man. Mm-hmm. And that he works extremely hard. Mm-hmm. And that's when you really start learning from him, I think.
Mm-hmm. Did you overlap with him at all?
Yeah.
Yeah. You'd see him kind of raging around the newsroom, and there is a lot of bluster and a lot of personality, not only from Jimmy Breslin, but a lot of these guys, Pete Hamill, the rest of these guys, right?
I mean, it was a romance.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when I first went to the Daily News, there was a guy, when he mentioned the New York Times, he'd write the New York Times, comma, a small English language daily headquartered on Manhattan's West Side. Right? And what could be better than that? We ran the town.
Right,
it was our city.
Right.
I mean, it just flat out was. And then, we started getting in a fight with the Post, which was a little bit, at the beginning, a little bit like Muhammad Ali getting in a bar fight, and that elevated them, but then it turned out these guys actually knew what they were doing. So.
Well, I mean, the whole notion of a columnist, I mean, it's not just tabloids, and we've got a collection here that includes lots of people. And the case really is that, in the midst of knocking out these headlines and talking about scandals and, something that happened yesterday or even a great sports story, it actually ends up being like literature, right?
Yeah. And look, there are a lot of literary names here. Ernest Hemingway, Eleanor Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt. There were a lot of people who spent their time working as newspaper columnists to sort of, to pay the bills as they worked on books or larger projects. I think one of the things Michael said, which I think is really important, is the concept of how hard people worked and how hard a Jimmy Breslin works day in and day out. Or Shirley Povich, who's in this volume, who was the great sports writer for the Washington Post. He showed up for work 50 years, every single day for 50 years and filed a column. That's an incredible amount of work, and I think while there is so much opinion writing now, it's so easy for everybody to log on the internet and say whatever they want to say, the concept of showing up day after day and putting in the hard yards is fading.
Yeah, I mean, what's that about? Yeah, go ahead.
I think just going to the scene is it's not just showing up at work, it's going out there in the rain and the whether, and that's what I think makes the real difference.
Well, in fact, on that note, let me embarrass you a little bit and read a little bit from your column. This is from the September 12th edition of the Daily News, and it's a Michael Daly column, and it starts, one after another, they pitch themselves from the remaining tower, choosing certain death over the blazing horror above. As each dark figure plummeted, a lone human life seemed more enormous than all the destruction. They invariably extended their arms and legs, and they always seemed to land on their backs with a boom the living will never forget. One woman hit a building sign and ceased to resemble a woman at all. Then, just as you had watched yet another person take the fatal leap, the second tower began to collapse. So obviously you were there.
I was, yeah.
And were you in the vicinity? What you heard about
Across
the
street
first
from
plane?
the North Tower.
You heard about the first plane and just headed
I
down.
went down. Yeah, actually, I started the morning watching a little-known guy named Mike Bloomberg vote, and we walked downtown. We must have gone 20 blocks. One person recognized him. And it was a woman who said, "I didn't see you at such and such dinner party last night." And he said, "Another dinner party I wasn't invited to." And this is the,
that was
this is
gonna
the
be the
Republican
column.
primary, right? So I figured this is a great column, right?
Great column,
I walk
yeah.
with Bloomberg. I say, "See you later. I got a column. I got nothing to worry about. I can relax," because you start the day with your heart going like that. It's like 8 o'clock in the morning. I'm home. And then all of a sudden I called the desk and I said, "A plane just hit the World Trade Center." I went down there and that was that.
Wow. And how did you get that column done? I mean, it's extraordinary. You're covered in debris, and you're thinking about friends, and you're realizing you've lost friends there.
I don't even remember writing. But, I mean, the thing is about that business is that, first of all, you're standing there watching people die and you're not doing anything to help them. I mean, I can remember marking how many people were jumping with little marks on a notepad. And then when the North Tower came down, I mean, if you want to really feel ridiculous, have a notepad in your hand, be running away, and it went dark. And I thought it was like a tree falling, like that was the shadow. And I thought, great, I'm going to get squished by the freaking World Trade Center with a notepad in my hand. And then, but then, when you look and you realize, I saw Riggs as dear friends, so I knew they were dead. And then, but at 3 o'clock, you gotta write. She just started walking uptown, and in the midst of it, one thing I remember writing is I was drinking a cup of coffee and had money in it. I couldn't figure it out. And like a few weeks later, an intern from the news came up and said, "Listen, I really want to apologize. You were walking up the West Side Highway, and I thought you were looking for money." I put money in your coffee cup because I was all covered with.
Wow.
And I had change in my coffee.
Wow. Amazing. When you see the young writers coming up who want to be a columnist, they want to be a columnist at the New York Post. What do you? Well, I know you can just give them the book now, but what do you tell them, and how do you try and guide them?
Well, first of all, you tell them to read the greats. I think one of the reasons we started doing this book is because we were amazed to discover this book didn't exist. It was a book we all wanted to read. It was a book we wanted to give to young journalists and say, look, this is how it's done. And I think the other great valuable lesson, as Michael said, is you got to get out there. You got to get out from behind your desk. You need to go to the scene. You need to get out in the streets if you want to have an authentic voice, and if you have something you really want to say.
So far from pontificating,
George Orwell, he was writing about an execution, and he went there, and to me this says more about capital punch than anything. And he's watching a guy get led up to the gallows. The guy's arms bound behind him, and the guy's going to be dead in a minute. And there's a puddle of water at the bottom of the steps. And the guy, without even thinking about it, stepped around the water so he wouldn't get his feet wet.
Jeez.
That, to me, that's newspaper writing.
Sure, to even notice that. All right, folks, it is a very addictive book. It is a fine book. It is on sale tomorrow. We highly recommend it. Deadline artist Mike Daly, good to see you. Jesse, we'll talk again real soon. Right now, we're going to take a break. I'll be back in a minute with a preview of tomorrow night's program. Stay with us.